If you're not familiar with the franchise, you surely asked yourself, why is Kirby and the Forgotten Land so important again? The next mainline Kirby game holds indeed a significant weight and will not only determine the future of the series, but left behind the troublesome past of unlucky experiments and cancellations. After all, most Nintendo franchises have already made the scary step into three-dimensional environments over 20 years ago, and although some of them haven't tried again since then, there are only very few left to make that jump. Yoshi obviously is a candidate, but the main difference between Yoshi and Kirby are the clear information we have on the development of different Kirby games. To our knowledge, Nintendo never stated how there were attempts to bring Yoshi into a 3D experience, and games like Woolly or Crafted World showed no signs of changing that. Unlike Kirby, who used spin-offs and minigames to unofficially tease the inevitable first proper 3D Kirby. Sorry Yoshi fans, maybe next time. Another part of the reason is how Nintendo likes to pass Yoshi to another team, because they seemingly don't want to use their own resources. Mainline Kirby, on the other hand, is always developed by HAL, so it's not like Nintendo doesn't know who and how a 3D Kirby should be handled. With all that information in mind, it seems a little weird why it took Kirby so long to finally step up. It's not like with Sonic, whose original genre of speeding through 2D levels is rather complicated to transfer into a whole new dimension. Kirby platformer were always simple since the very beginning, so there surely must have been some unexpected problems regarding the shift to 3D. Well, it's a little more complicated, so let's find out the reason why there never was a proper 3D Kirby. First, you have to be aware of some very general aspects every creator is, quote, suffering from. Whenever you like to realize your vision of something, be it a book, movie, game, or simply a video, usually you have a rough idea of how that vision should look like in the end, but sometimes the finished end result just doesn't feel right, and although it would be enjoyable for many people, you can't release it with a clear conscience. To give you an example of my own repertoire, when Game Builder Garage came out, I started to work on a short little Kirby game that was a mix of traditional Kirby elements and a marble mania. Most of the work was already done, with the level design being finished and some ideas worked out, but I could never truly get right how Kirby should control, and it never really felt like the concept I had in mind. In addition, the limitations of Game Builder Garage really hampered my initial vision, which is why I stopped working on the project despite putting 100 hours of playtime into it. Of course, I could wrap up everything to a somewhat complete package, and maybe a handful of players would enjoy it without knowing what I had originally in mind. But would this really satisfy my creative initiative? Sometimes it takes months, if not years, to really understand how someone could realize their idea in the most efficient way. Metroid Dread is the latest example of how a game should go through hell multiple times to finally see the lifeless light of a poorly ventilated store. The director stated on multiple occasions how Dread was supposed to be released over 15 years ago and had more than one try to finally show its concept being fully realized. The Emmys specifically were the cause for this enormous delay, because the development team could never really get their behavior and the feeling they should create right. And this is something I can fully relate to. As the director, you know what the player should go through if he encounters one of those robots. You know what tone should be set the second they spot you and in which manner they should hunt for your life. If the game is not able to reproduce this idea, then it makes no sense to bring out a half-baked end result the creator does not stand behind. This leads directly to the Kirby franchise, which consists of multiple games that either never saw the light of day or needed some more attempts to work properly. Kirby Air, for example, was initially introduced as an N64 game but later released for the GameCube. What seemed like an entertaining spin-off to bridge the time until the next mainline Kirby game released should ultimately have been the beginning of a troublesome development cycle of unfinished games. E3 2005. With the Wii on the horizon, there was only so much time left for Kirby to make one final splash on the GameCube. After 5 years of Kirby 64's release, you could at last see the first trailer of what is presented like a direct successor to the Crystal Shards. The same dynamic camera angles and returning features like the helper mechanic from Kirby Superstar should foreshadow the game as the culmination of everything we have seen from the franchise to this date. What's even more exciting was the fact how completed the game already looked. Surely we would not have to wait more than a year to experience this new action 2D platformer, right? But this wasn't the only moment a Kirby game got lost in time. As the developer stated, there were 2 other Kirby games in work for the GameCube. Both could not reach the standards the team tried to achieve, although it seems like there was nothing wrong with it, going by the little insights they gave us. Especially the Lost Kirby game had plenty of work already done if they decided to officially announce it at E3, yet still they decided to scratch all that work and leave it untouched for the time being. And this is what I mean by saying it doesn't matter how great something appears to be. For me as a fan, it's an extreme shame that we could never see the promising GameCube game, even though there seemed nothing wrong with it, but as a creator, I can only imagine how there must have been something to prevent the team from finishing it. Luckily, this is a case where work was not done for nothing, as Return to Dreamland and Star Allies are heavily reminiscent of the mysterious GameCube game and surely reused concepts they wanted to depict back then. However, all of this only relates to the 2D side of the franchise. One of the other 2 cancelled games was supposed to be a 3-dimensional Kirby game, which shares visually clear similarities with Kirby's Blowout Blast for the 3DS. While we can only speculate how much of this cancelled 3D game was transferred to Blowout Blast, we can say for sure that the jump to 3D still appeared to be many years away. I mean, if they couldn't even produce another 2-dimensional platformer according to their visions, how on earth could someone expect a full 3D one? In an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto in 2011 about Super Mario 3D Land, he discussed how 3D Land should bridge the gap between 2D and 3D and how some players had problems in past 3D games with the movement. According to him, jumping on a Goomba posed a completely new challenge for many unskilled players, since the Goomba itself could move in more directions than simply left and right. The same goes for question blocks, which he hasn't talked about but were extremely rare in Mario 64 and completely absent in Sunshine due to how Nintendo was probably not fully satisfied with their implementation in 3D. Kirby, on the other side, doesn't need to make precise jumps on enemies in order to take them out. What's troubling him is how players would need to accurately aim for foes, instead of just spitting them out in one direction like in 2D games. This concern was kinda quote fixed in Blowout Blast, where a little arrow would help and indicate the trajectory of the projectile. While this solution surely works well on first sight, it can be annoying to always have an inelegant assistance in front of your protagonist. This is the reason why The Forgotten Land is orientated towards 3D World's level design instead of offering open areas. 3D World is the first step into 3-dimensional environments due to combining the best elements of traditional side-scrolling Mario games while proving the merits 3D movement allows, especially a fixed camera. It might seem obvious and maybe a little strange why it took Kirby so long to finally make that step, but all the experiments and failed concepts show how some ideas need their time to be fully realized in a convincing way. 3D games were and perhaps are still kinda overwhelming for many beginners, and although Mario always tries to please children as well as his older fans, you have to be aware that Kirby is the ultimate entrance franchise, especially for younger children. Keeping that in mind, it becomes much more intimidating to transfer your beginner-friendly mascot into much more advanced territory. And even if Kirby and the Forgotten Land will not be as grandiose as you hope, be aware that this is only the first step. Sometimes it takes many years to iron out seemingly simple mechanics. Notice how Nintendo started to place the question blocks mainly near walls in 3D World and Odyssey, just to give players a safety surface to not unintentionally walk or jump behind. The solution seems obvious now, but it took them 15 years to figure out, which makes the 20-year-long wait for the first 3D Kirby not so odd after all.